So,
Oh yeah, go ahead. Did you have a question?
do I say the opening prayer again?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to admit the media members in now, everyone, just so you're aware. Okay, I think we are ready to start. So thank you everyone for joining this morning. I just want to make everyone aware that this is being recorded. If any members of the media would like a copy of today's recording, just please send me a message in the chat and I will make sure to send you a copy after we finish. So I'm going to start by passing it off to Gramma Shingoose, a residential survivor. She will also be joined by NDP MP for Winnipeg Centre, Leah Gazan, Grand Chief Arlen Dumas, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Grand Chief Jerry Daniel, Southern Chiefs Organization, and Grand Chief Garrison Settee, Manitoba, Kiwetinawi, Okimakanak. After they speak, we'll take questions from the media. To ask a question, please use your raise hand function, or you can send me a message in the chat. Okay, over to you, Jerry.
Good morning. I'm Gramma Shingoose, a residential school survivor, and I welcome everybody. On May 28th, we received news of 215 children's remains were found in Kamloops Residential School, BC. This news had a direct impact on every survivor across Canada, residential school survivor. Our emotions were impacted. We were triggered. Old wounds opened up. Our nation woke up. I say Chimigwech for all the support, outpouring support from everyone that came and that are going to BC and offering that support, but also my statement, I guess, before we can reconcile, we need the truth to be acknowledged. What I experienced in residential school is an act of genocide. It is violent that the government's failure to acknowledge this fact leaves the experience of survivors up for debate. It's a tragic time. I want to know that everybody's like the survivors at the Sacred Fire that we held here in Winnipeg. They came with their stories. There's so many stories that are untold right now that need to be shared. Our survivors are reaching out for support. But I ask that each one of you bring that love forward to the survivors and their families. Because when we were in school, we never received that love. We received hate. We were, as a child, we were treated with hate, and no child should ever experience that. I say Chimigwech to our leadership here, that's here to offer our support We need you. We need you to bring voice for survivors across Canada and within the province of Manitoba. Egosist Chimigwich.
Thank you so much. I'll now pass it over to NDP MP Leah Gazan.
I'd like to start out by thanking Elder Shingoose for sharing not only her experience, but her strength and wisdom and her leadership, certainly in the province of Manitoba and around the country, bringing to light the genocide that occurred in residential school. And as Elder Shingoose mentioned, there is no reconciliation without truth. And what happened in residential school was clearly an act of genocide with impacts that reverberate our families, community today. And with the discovery of the 250 children at Kamloops to Swepmik, it's a sad reminder that many of the kids who went to these schools never returned home, leaving families and loved ones without closure, wondering where they were. There is no legal definition in international law for cultural genocide. What happened at the residential schools was genocide, full stop, and clearly falls under Article 2 of the UN Convention on Genocide. It's time that this government acknowledges the truth that Canada and churches perpetrated genocide on Indigenous peoples, specifically children. If we are going to move forward, this truth needs to be told. And I think in honor of all the children who never returned home, in honor of all the mothers and fathers and families that were left to suffer in grief, we must end the debate about whether what happened in residential schools was genocide. That is violent. We must bring forward truth. So with that, I'll pass it along. And again, I just want to thank all the leadership in Manitoba, including Elder Gramma Shingoose, for raising this. It's time that this government honor the truth.
Thank you so much, Leah. So we'll now pass it over to Grand Chief Dumas.
Good morning, Grand Chief Dumas, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. Firstly, on behalf of the Assembly, I want to extend my sincere condolences to the family and loved ones of the 4 citizens who were randomly murdered by a cowardly act of hate in London, Ontario. The AMC condemns all forms of hate against our Muslim brothers and sisters, and First Nations stand in solidarity with you in your struggle against racism in this country. I want to acknowledge my fellow Grand Chiefs. I also want to acknowledge Gramma Shingoose, Indian residential school survivors, and all other survivors who persevered over genocidal acts. And your voice and your legacy will continue and provide justice in this country. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the Member of Parliament, Leah Gazan, for the invitation to provide a few words in support of our motion on behalf of the Assembly. The motion that the member for Winnipeg Centre will be seeking will be for unanimous consent for the House tomorrow, and speaks to the support and the long-held position of the Chiefs in Manitoba that the killing of First Nations and Indigenous people in Canada by the state amounts to genocide. Also want to call into reminder that over the years, we've found more and more evidence of the fact of systemic discrimination, systemic racism, federal sponsored initiatives such as eugenics, such as nutritional experiments, such as removing children by gunpoint by RCMP, and all of these initiatives were funded by the federal government to literally rip our children from our homes, from their culture and from their families. And it's time that we address this issue with truth, with honesty, so that we can move forward and provide the healing that is much needed for all of us, so that we can move together in a path of healing, so that we can bring strength to one another. But we can't do that if we continue to acknowledge and belittle the history and the reality of our families and our survivors. I'm a third generation survivor of residential school. I see today the impacts that this federal funded sanctioned interference in my community and who I am as an individual has impacted generations. As well, the churches need to atone for their role. I'm very disappointed with the stance of the church for their silence and not wanting to move forward in a meaningful way. And it's unfortunate, and it makes me think about the value of law and whose law is more important. These religious organizations and their documents tell us how we're to live together, the golden rule and things of that such. But it seems that the law of man seems to be more fearful and distracts people from speaking honestly about what had happened and the role that their institution played in the murder and killing of our children, of our babies. And it's unacceptable. And we need to move forward. And for this government, you now have an opportunity to correct these historic injustices. And for that, and further to that, they are not historic. The last residential school closed in 1996. My younger siblings attended residential school. Residential school is not a historic thing that happened hundreds of years ago. It happened just yesterday, and it's happening today. Therefore, I stand in solidarity with our MP, Leah Gazan, who's going to bring forward this very important vote that everyone will be watching, and we will see how we move forward. I know that the Prime Minister is now acknowledging what had happened and has spoken to it in Parliament, and that others need to do the same. And it's very important that we stand united. I want to acknowledge all those people who actually stopped me on the street, people that normally would not have any interaction with, and they actually acknowledge what had happened, and many of them are shocked. Many of them are not First Nations people, and they are shocked at the reality. And as somebody who had gone through the educational institutions at the time when I did, and I remember being guided away from this conversation that genocide did not happen, when nothing could be further from the truth. And I believe that those 215 babies or children that were found in those unmarked, undocumented graves speak to the reality of what genocide was. And I look forward to the progress that we're going to make, because the conversation has started. It is being listened to by everyone around the country, by everybody around the world, and we will continue to push and advocate so that we can bring forward all the necessary ingredients so we can have true reconciliation and acknowledgement of what had happened, and quit blaming Indigenous people for our reality when all this government sanctioned initiatives have tried so hard to extinguish and eradicate the Indian problem in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now pass it over to Grand Chief Daniels.
Bonjour, Dinawe Magiduk. Miigwech Gijimani Tunungum. Miigwech Gramma Shingoose for the prayer this morning, and thank you, MP Leah Gazan, for your leadership on this. It's very important. I think that Parliament and the leaders of Canada come to terms with the reality and the truth. Win. Thank you, Grand Chief Dumas, for your words and really articulating a lot of what has transpired. I'm happy to see Grand Chief Garrison Settee here as well, and I look forward to hearing from you. On behalf of the Southern Chiefs organization, we absolutely support the establishment and the complete consensus that needs to be held at Parliament in Canada. It's absolutely important that every single member of Parliament understands the history and that we move away from denial. And that's what we've seen. We've seen systematic waves of denial in different forms, and it's undeniable what had taken place. It was an act of genocide, and you can look through the definitions, the 5, A, B, C, D, and E, when it comes to defining what genocide is, as was laid out at the Convention on the Prevention of Punishment and the Crime of Genocide. And it's absolutely the truth. And it's important that the leadership in Canada acknowledge that, because the change cannot simply happen within the minds and the acts of leaders. It actually has to happen also within the minds and hearts of all Canadians and all new Canadians. And that can't happen if the leadership doesn't unanimously reconcile themselves with the past and what had taken place, and also what is taking place throughout the last many decades, and the government policies that continue to create the social economic condition of Indigenous peoples here today. And so it's absolutely integral for Canada, for not only Canadians, but also for the rest of the world that needs to understand that these sorts of acts are unacceptable for humanity. It's important that we lead through action, and Canada needs to do these kinds of things. And so I have no less expectation that every single MP would endorse and support the complete recognition of genocide in all its definitions for Canada. That is what the residential school's intent was, to kill the Indian in the child, and really in this instance, kill 215 children and undocument them and hide them and deny them from the history. And we have no doubt in our minds that we're going to continue to see evidence of this continued act throughout every single residential school that we can look at. And so it's absolutely important that we come to terms with that. And we encourage every single Canadian to do everything that they can to not only bring out the truth, but to change the narrative for Indigenous peoples and for all Canadians. And also we want to give our condolences to the Muslim community and the Islamics who lost their lives in London just the other day. Our thoughts and our prayers are with them as well. And hopefully all Canadians can come together with a true era of reconciliation, because we're stronger as through our knowledge and our collective efforts and the love that we all share for our families and for our communities. And so that needs to be the future, but we must reconcile ourselves with the past. And that's why this motion, this act being pushed forward by Leah Gazan is absolutely important for all of the ancestors that have left us and all of those who are to come and all of the children. It's absolutely important for these sorts of acts to take place. So with that, I want to thank everyone who's been a part of today's press conference, and for all those who are fighting to create the necessary change that will have a better future, create a better future for all of us. Miigwech.
Thank you. And finally, we're going to pass it over to Grand Chief Settee.
It's my honor to be here this morning, and I want to acknowledge the Member of Parliament for allowing us to be part of this conversation, a very important conversation that needs to be had. And I also acknowledge my colleagues, the Grand Chief of AMC and the Grand Chief of SCO, for their support, because I think this is one of those issues where we need to stand together to ensure that justice is served on behalf of the 215. And I want to thank my colleagues for acknowledging the loss of the Muslim family, a great atrocity, a great tragedy nationwide. And we just want to offer our prayers for the families and the remaining child from that family is totally unacceptable. It just goes to show what kind of attitudes exist in this country and have existed for a long time. I've always said that there can be no reconciliation without truth. We've talked about truth and reconciliation, but now we're talking about a truth that the nation has denied and have not accepted. But now it's time to say that this act that was committed on our people is an act of genocide. We can no longer deny it. We cannot sidestep it, because if we are to heal as a nation, we have to admit that this is an act of genocide. And the Manitoba Kiwetnu Ugimagan supports the motion of Winnipeg Centre Member Parliament Leah Gazan in calling for the unanimous agreement of the members of the House of Commons that the former Indian residential school system is an act of genocide, as it is defined in Article 2 of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and also in Article 6 of the Roman Statute that established the International Criminal Court. There is no way around it. We must admit that this is an act of genocide, and we're calling on the members of Parliament to address it and call it for what it is, and to support this motion. Recently, I wrote to the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and to the Minister of Justice, Attorney General David Lametti, to request that the Attorney General immediately commence an investigation with the objective of determining the basis for prosecution under the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. We need to ensure that any additional burials at former Indian residential schools and any investigations of the circumstances must not be conducted by the RCMP, as the RCMP were an integral part of the Indian residential school system. The Minister of Public Safety acknowledged the central role of the RCMP in his comments to the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs last week. So MKO is calling for any searches and any found burial sites to be under the control and guidance of our elders and knowledge keepers, and to be protected in accordance to the customary laws and practices of each First Nation. We are calling for an investigation of these sites to be carried out by an Indigenous police service that is selected by the affected First Nations. MKO is calling on the provincial ministers of justice to work with all the First Nations in each province to ensure that any site that is designated as a crime scene is placed under the control of investigating Indigenous police services. So we're also asking for agreements between First Nations and the federal and provincial governments to ensure that all of the remains of our children are repatriated to their home communities according to the wishes of their families and their communities. And we're calling for legislation, new legislation similar to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act in the United States, to ensure that our people are protected and that they are in control, and that the repatriation of the remains of our children and all First Nation remains, wherever they are found, are located. So that I'm thankful that we're able to join together to address this very important matter this morning.
Thank you, everyone. I have someone let me know that there might be an issue with sound. If anyone else is having issue hearing, could you please let me know so I can try to sort that out? We will now open up to questions from the media. If you have a question, could you please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen? You can also send me a private message in the chat. Just as a reminder, you will get one question and one follow-up. Okay, so the first question is going to go to Dylan Robertson. Dylan, could you just state the name of your publication, please?
Yeah, sure. It's Dylan Robertson from the Winnipeg Free Press. Thanks so much, everyone, for taking our questions today. It's an important topic. For each of the Grand Chiefs, I was just wondering if you could please explain what contact you've had with the provincial government ever since the Kamloops revelation came to light. I might start with Grand Chief Dumas and then just go to the 2 regional Grand Chiefs.
Thanks for the question. We reached out, our chairs of our Women's Council at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs have asked for a meeting with our provincial colleagues, but unfortunately we haven't been able to coordinate that meeting. I'm quite disappointed with the steps that this provincial government has taken on this issue. It's unfortunate that they have not made every effort to try and facilitate and participate in conversations that we need to have within our province with our provincial counterparts. And I think it sort of speaks truth to the issue of the disconnect that exists between these institutions and how they are incapable of working with us in a meaningful way. It's unfortunate because I know that almost all of these individuals on a provincial level have my cell phone number. They're more than free to text me, but no one has made an effort to do so. So it's quite disappointing. Unfortunately, not surprising, but very disappointing.
Grand Chief Settee and I actually had met with Minister Squires, I think, just shortly after, and also Eileen Clark, shortly after we were aware of what had taken place. Our conversation was mainly around child welfare and some of the work with the Leadership Council and creating the terms of reference and trying to sort out how we could work with the province on that specific item. They did share, obviously, their condolences in terms of their actions and recognition of genocide. That has not been shared with us, and I don't think that we've heard much more than that from the provincial government.
We also received some correspondence from Minister Clark at MKO, and also Minister Gordon also verbally sent her condolences. So the conversation that we had with Minister Squires were also in conversation talking about the potential ramifications of what has really happened and how we can need to move forward. But this is just the beginning of conversation. We need to continue to talk.
Good stuff. And my follow-up, I'm not trying to distract from the genocide designation. I didn't have a lot of questions. So my follow-up is about the Catholic Church and the records. We know that there's been withheld records in some provinces. It doesn't issue in all provinces, according to the scholars. Some of the chiefs who have a Catholic residential school in their community, they weren't sure if that was an issue. I was just wondering if the Grand Chiefs or Gramma Shingoose or MP, Gazan, if any of you have heard about specific schools in Manitoba where the Catholic Church is not providing the records.
Thank you so much for your question, Dylan. I think it's important to note. I mean, we're finding finding out as this goes along. Former Senator Murray Sinclair has indicated there could be as many as 25,000 children who have gone missing. I think the point here is that the TRC was very clear in their calls to action, including calls to action 58 in relation to the Catholic Church. It's time that they heed these calls to action. Hand over records has been requested by Prime Minister Trudeau, and apologize for the harms that occurred in residential schools, including Catholic residential schools, and noting that 70% of residential schools in this country were under the authority of the Catholic Church. It's time for us to move forward.
Thank you, Dylan. So the next question is going to Chris Reynolds at the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, folks. Thanks very much for your time and your words. A question first for you, Ms. Gazan, and anyone else is, of course, welcome to chime in as well. I was wondering if, on the question of the definition of genocide, if you've looked abroad to other countries to see where colonial treatment of Indigenous peoples that amounts to genocide has provided some kind of, I don't know if blueprint is the right word, but has offered an example as to reinforce your case all the more, though it may well not need reinforcement.
I think the UN definition under the UN Convention on Genocide, Article 2, is very clear. And if you read Article 2, as Grand Chief Daniels noted, A to E, what occurred in residential schools meets all criteria, including E, which states forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. In order to qualify as genocide, you only have to meet one of the criteria under the definition. Residential schools meet all the criteria under the definition. So I think it's important for Canada to take note and do the right thing and speak truth to what happened at residential schools, which is genocide.
If I may, I sort of wanted to add to that and touch up on the last question as well. I know that the church back home, which is a Roman Catholic church, is very well documented. They had a litany of history that they had documented. So we know that the information is there. We know that the department itself would have access to a lot of significant information. But to Mr. Reynolds' question, the onus shouldn't be on First Nations to justify their position. And I believe that that's always the issue. It's contentious. I think today is the opportunity for everyone to take the higher road and be honest and open and bring forward the truth. As in my statements before, there's government sanctioned eugenics. There was TB experiments that were government funded. There, children are ripped from their homes by the RCMP, and then further to that, children were ripped from their homes under the auspices of the churches, who played a meaningful and tangible role on the removal of those children. All those schools that were funded weren't doing them out of charity. They had received funding from the federal government to actually take children away from their homes. So I'd rather turn your question around to the federal government and be truthful and honest and actually show the many attempts over the course of history, right up until today, all these government sanctioned experiments that were conducted on our people, on First Nations people, in these institutions, in our communities, nutritional experiments. You call it, they're all being uncovered. These are all government sanctioned initiatives that had happened to our communities, and they need to be addressed. They need to be dealt with. So I just wanted to add that to your question.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, Ms. Gazan, have you received any positive indications or any indications whatsoever from any of the other parties on your motion?
Well, I was really disappointed that the Liberal government, including the Prime Minister, didn't show up for the vote on the NDP opposition day motion. I have asked several questions in the House, citing the UN definition on the Convention of Genocide without acknowledgement from the Liberal government. I think, Canadians, more and more want reconciliation in this country. They are ready to move forward in truth. And I'm hoping that the federal government certainly does the right things, as all parliamentarians across all party lines does the right thing, and unanimously supports my motion to affirm that what happened in residential schools is in fact an act of genocide.
Thank you, Chris. So we have time for a few more questions. So I'll invite members of the media again to use the raise hand function or send me a message in the chat if you'd like to ask a question. Okay, I'm not seeing any more raised hands, so that will bring a close to today's press conference. Thank you so much to everyone for speaking. Thank you for all the members of media for joining today. If you would like a recording of today's press conference, please send me an email. There will also be a press release going out shortly. Thank you.